time for our speaker. So we do record, yes. And hopefully it's available. I don't know how readily. I haven't really used it any, but let me introduce Marc Racicot. If you read the notice, there's a 3-page rendition of his background, and it's very thorough and very nice. And I don't intend to go through that in detail. There are so many things that we can say about Marc Racicot. I'm very impressed, but let me just name a few highlights. He was born in Thompson Falls, raised in, he says, Miles City and Libby, both. And he was has a bachelor's degree from Carroll College. He went to law school at the University of Montana, graduated in 1973. Then he went into the Army as a JAG officer. I was a JAG officer also, by the way. And but he served in West Germany for a couple of years and was very active there. He then became a deputy county attorney in Missoula for a couple of years. He then became a special prosecutor for the Department of Justice from 1979 to 1988. 1988, he ran for Attorney General and succeeded. He beat the now Supreme Court Chief Justice Mike McGrath in that race, and served as Attorney General from 1988 to 1993. 92, as you know, he was elected governor. He beat Dorothy Bradley, and who's now joined with him in supporting Gary Buchanan as a candidate for Congress. Interestingly enough, in 1996, he again ran for re-election, this time against Chet Blaylock, who died during the campaign, and Judy Johnson was named to fulfill that vacancy, and he easily won the election again. In 2002, he was appointed as chairman of the National Republican Party. In 2004, and by the way, he was at least it was announced that he was the first choice of Bush for Attorney General, but he declined that position. In 2004, he then worked as the chairman of George Bush's re-election campaign, and in 2005 through 2009, I guess it is, he worked with the American Insurance Association, which is the principal lobbyist for the insurance companies of this country. Very powerful organization, by the way. He's been on the board of directors for Mass Mutual, an insurance company in Massachusetts, Weyerhaeusen, and Jobs for American Graduates, and also a trustee for Carroll College. And I only just mentioned a few things really that Marc has done, and we're very impressed and very pleased you could join us today. We appreciate very much your taking time. So go ahead and make your presentation.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's a privilege, and I have been looking forward to having the chance to talk with some more of my fellow Montanans. Tom and I were at the Constitutional Convention celebration in Helena, and had opportunities to talk throughout the various 2.5 or 3 days. And I told Tom that at his inquiry that I would go anywhere to talk to my fellow Montanans if it was possible about the state of our democracy from my perspective. I've been genuinely concerned, and I would probably suspect that overwhelmingly all of you are as well. And as a consequence of that, it was, I thought it was a great privilege to be invited to join you this morning. A little bit of history. In 2016, when the primary campaign was ongoing and people were engaged in different political battles on both sides of the political aisle, I made an early decision that I did not believe that Donald J. Trump had the character to serve this country and as president of the United States. And I made that known and tried to solicit other colleagues, urging them to become familiar with the Constitution and its recognition and requirement that our first loyalty is to our country. It's not to our party. But unfortunately, my timing wasn't very good apparently, and as a consequence, did not draw any of my colleagues that I thought I might. I did an op-ed in the Washington Post and let it be known that I would not be supporting and not be voting for Donald Trump. It did not appear to slow the wheels of politics down in any way whatsoever. And Teresa and I had been in Montana since 2009 and working from Montana, a lot of travel. And as a consequence of that, and we were up in Bigport, I was kind of removed from daily affairs. And I also thought that perhaps I had had my time and that my relevance was highly questionable. And I should probably be gracious enough to recognize my station in life and just simply be a good citizen and be supportive of people that I had confidence in and be engaged in the political activity of the state as it came to me rather than trying to precipitate it. That's the way we pretty much stayed until I got a call in December from Bob Story, who some of you would probably know, and who invited me to the Montana Taxpayers Association. And we've known each other for a very long time. And he wanted me to make the presentation. Throughout the course of the years from up until 2016, or from 2016 till last year, 2021, I talked a lot and commiserated with all of my friends and neighbors. And it seemed to me that regardless of party, that there was this growing concern about the life of our republic. And so I decided that's what I was going to talk about at the Taxpayers Association. What did I know about tax? I said to myself. I certainly wasn't going to compete with Tom Tao on a dissertation about taxes. So I decided to talk about the democracy. And I was surprised because there were probably a couple hundred people in the room, and they overwhelmingly let me know that this was something at the forefront of their minds and that they were anxious about it and concerned about what was happening in the country. And so I decided that, and it got publicized, not at my urging, but nonetheless, it did get publicized. And I started to receive more and more invitations. And I decided that I was going to continue to try and talk about this because it was so urgent. So that's how I get to where I am today. I've probably traveled to 25 to 30 different events. I don't know how many interviews I've done. I've done presentations in state and out of state. And I have been surprised by how many of us, and I would include you and I in the same group in that regard, are vitally concerned about the life of our republic. We recognize how delicate it is, how it depends upon our self-discipline, upon our respect for each other, our ability to communicate with each other. The rule of law that we talk about and is so nebulous to so many really encapsulates the spirit of our existence and our dedication to our country as much as it does the letter of the law. So how we proceed, the manners that we exhibit, the trust that we have in one another, the recognition of timeless values, all of those things go into being included in the definition of the rule of law. It's not just observing the tenets of the law. I suspect that the pandemic probably made all of these issues a little bit more glaring in some respects, but there was one central character in my judgment that had no character and still has no character and still addresses in the cruelest, most bitter and angry terms what it is that's taking place in this country and appealing to the worst side of our nature. And unfortunately, there has been subscription beyond what it should be. So I also realized that there were many things I didn't know, that I didn't properly appreciate for how far we had come as a civilization in the United States of America, and how long it had taken to get here. And what I mean by that is this: a democracy was first discussed by Aristotle and Plato, and of course there was no printing press, there was no internet, thank God, and we ended up in a situation where there was experimentation. We started with the law of the jungle as a human race, and it didn't work so well. We tried oligarchies, monarchies, theocracies, despots, tyrants of all different kinds throughout the course of history. And by we, I mean all of humanity. None of it worked. We landed our forebears on the shores of the eastern coast in 1607. It took us 180 years from that moment until we had the Articles of Confederation, which were much less than a compact or an understanding. They were simply a gesture of friendship. They were not a governing system, but it took 180 years for us to even get to that point. So now, we're 2,500 years into experimentations and really democracy just being discovered. The printing press had been discovered. You had political philosophers around the globe who were writing now, and they could share their writings. Our framers, by providence or coincidence, depending upon your perspective, decided that when they couldn't pay their war debts, when every state had its own navy, when they were printing their own money, they couldn't decide on anything that had to do with the whole of the country, that they had to do something different. And so the advertisement was, in 1787, we're going to gather in Philadelphia. We're going to try to amend the Articles of Confederation. Well, as you know, poignantly, it turned out to be much more than that. And because they recognized when you couldn't pay your soldiers, when you couldn't feed them, when you couldn't house them, when you couldn't pay your debts, when you could not live with a central repository of authority and capacity to address all of these various interests, as uncomplicated as things were then, think of where we were going as a nation ultimately. And miraculously, it was not a perfect document. There was a lot of compromises made that some of which turned out to be drastically tragic and unfortunate. But nonetheless, they put in place a system that allowed for us as a free and independent people, if we had trust one another, if we were noble ourselves, if we could speak to the truth, if we could impose self-discipline, if we could do all of those things that we have valued. And as I look around the room, I see that most of us, it appears at least on the surface, are about the same age. And we grew up with an America that is quite different than today. And where living next door to another family was just something more than having a neighbor you didn't know, where we took care of each other. And I think we instinctively began with trust. I mean, Jim Elliott and Tom Tao and the others who served in the legislature here didn't agree with me most of the time, I would suspect. Well, I wouldn't say most of the time, but I would say many times. And yet, I don't think they ever thought that we were lying to each other, or that we were deceiving each other, or that we were trying to take advantage of one another. We respected the power of ideas, and we debated, and we sat in committee rooms, and we were with each other constantly and continually. And something happens when people are together, when they deliberate together, when they're in each other's presence. And so now, you infuse the internet into this, and it's edgy, brassy, capacity to move instantaneously with 500,000 tweets being dispatched every minute for 24 hours a day and every day of the year, full of propaganda and huckster commentary that has absolutely nothing to do with the truth. It damages and destroys our politics, and we haven't learned how to live with it, how to deal with it. I mean, when I have a very large amount of distaste for Steve Bannon, but he said one thing that is probably accurate, and that is that they just flood the zone with crap. And so what we knew as a system, as a method of learning and working together and disagreeing when we had to, has turned into a race to flood the zone with crap. And unfortunately, our fellow citizens have embraced some of it because it feels comfortable. It lets them vindicate some of the impulses that they know they shouldn't vindicate, but they feel all right doing it because it's been done by other people. And as a consequence, we're tearing the democracy apart. So what do we do about it? And that was the first question asked of me at the taxpayers meeting was, so what do we do? And I thought to myself, you know, I have to do more than just try to exhort or argue with and try and persuade my fellow Montanans, but it was something that to me transcended partisan politics. And I voted for Joe Biden. I made it widely known because I just simply could not become involved in any way supportive of Donald Trump. And I think that what he has done to this country, and it shows you just how important it is one leader can be. We can disagree, but if we have to do it with an ethical perspective and a commitment to a common set of values that allows for us to continue to live in freedom. I'm certain the pandemic probably aggravated these circumstances. It made it more difficult for us. It separated us more than we were. But, you know, frankly, arguments over face masks seems to me to be a bit of a trifling expenditure of emotion and concern for one another. And frankly, even if it didn't do any good, I was going to do it because it might do some good. And yet here we were tearing each other apart over face masks. And he was aggravating the situation substantially. And so everything that you can do, in my judgment, to tear apart the country, he's more than capable of doing, and has done. And so we're in the same boat, whether you like being in the same boat with me or not. My guess is we're in the same boat, and our primary loyalty is to our country. And we have to speak up. We have to demand more. I've traveled around the country. I've spoken to a number of different groups. I'm absolutely convinced that 65% of us believe the same thing today. And that doesn't mean we might agree on a tax bill or a sales tax or this or that or any of those things. We know that there are some identifiable problems we have to fix, but they can be fixed, but not until we have some trust in each other. So that's what when Tom and I were at the Constitutional Convention celebration, celebrating an extraordinary document, a graceful and poetic commitment to one another that has served us incredibly well over the last 50 years. And to hear some describe it as a rag and as something that is leading us to devastation and destruction, it's not only heartbreaking, it's outrageous. And so this is a big fight, and it's going to take some time, and we have to do it with the kind of commitment to civility that is requirement. But in my judgment, there's some things that can be done. One of them is I'm firmly committed to a nonpartisan primary. I've been on the inside of these beasts, that is party politics, for a long time, and they don't control every aspect of it. But they direct funding, they direct support, they direct schedules, they provide an opportunity to channel and groom candidates, all fine and good. But at the same point in time, when I go to the primary election booth, I want to be able to vote for who I want to vote for. I mean, I voted a Democratic ballot this time because they're the candidates in my district, in my area. I didn't think my vote was relevant to them. It was more relevant someplace else. So I think we have to return to timeless values, not to a time of hopelessness. And we have to do it with some policy perspective, nonpartisan primaries, the resurrection of the fairness doctrine. I mean, these guys that are on these blogs are making millions of dollars. And every time there's a click, a share, a like, a dislike, that goes into the advertising algorithm, and they all ultimately benefit from this financially. And it's not even remotely close to journalism. It's yelling and screaming and appealing to the prurient and beastly side of our nature, which then lets everybody feel good about how they think they feel, rather than trying to elevate themselves to a level of behavior that's more noble. I can go on for quite some period of time, and I'm sorry to occupy so much time at the beginning. The other things that we're looking at, in addition to fairness doctrine, we have to do something about campaign finance. It's obscene. I mean, in the last election cycle, we spent $360 million in Montana. $360 million. You can't do anything constructive other than build a dam with $360 million in politics. There's no way that that's going to be constructively spent. In fact, I would bet most on this screen, like me, turn those ads off or mute them, regardless of which side they come from, because you know that they're angry, they're bitter, they're snarly, and they're appealing to the worst side of our nature. So there are things to be done. I was in touch, and there are things happening all across the country. There are 5 or 6 different national groups that are dealing with this nonpartisan election process. I was speaking yesterday with a group in Boston. They're doing things that are around the design of deliberative processes, trying to get Congress to rework themselves in a way that makes sense. Term limits are being discussed across the country for members of Congress, for the courts. And when you think about it, it's probably time for a refreshment of our democracy in some ways, especially as it pertains to deliberative processes. But we have to get back together in the same rooms. We have to listen to each other. We can't just travel back and forth to electronic town meetings and expect that it's going to work. And we have to get back to timeless values, the things you grew up with, I grew up with. And so that's what I've been doing. What have you been doing? I'm certain you've been studying and analyzing and voicing your concerns and trying to prepare things that you think will serve the state well and the country well. And I'd be delighted to talk about the things that have been on your agenda as well as my own.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Go ahead, any questions or comments? Come on, this group is not generally this silent. What's going on here? Well, let me ask a question to start out with, and we'll get, Jean Dahlman is with us here too. Well, let me ask a question to start out with. Normally, when this happens in our political history, what happens is that a new party emerges, and a new party then generally takes over. The Republican Party was a good example of exactly that, and a number of and others occasionally have come by and really made a good sounding board for a change in the country. Is that going to happen here?
From my perspective, I think it will. It depends upon what happens to the candidacy of the former president. If he files, if he reveals that he's going to run and he's serious and he gets engaged in the process and he's clearly a candidate, I think that is going to happen. And the formation of those efforts are ongoing around the country. Not numerous formations, but there's certainly more than one. And some of these groups have been in existence for a period of time that has allowed them to get highly organized. It's very, very difficult, as you know, to get on a ballot with a new party. But there are some of the efforts that are pretty highly, at least one that I'm aware of, pretty highly organized and have been fundraising and has plans. They've done extensive polling. They've determined which states they could be competitive in. But it will take, some commitment, I think, of both Democrats, Republicans, and Independents to be engaged in something meaningful that can actually change the direction that might otherwise be the only alternative. I think Gary's campaign is going to be relatively revelation during the congressional campaign in the eastern side of the state. It's not going to be determinative, but it'll give us some insight, I think, about whether or not there is enough of a corpus of us as Montanans to look in a different direction. But I do think there will be third-party formation. I'm going to be on a discussion in the not too distant future with a group called No Labels. And they've actually been in existence for quite some period of time, largely focused upon governance issues and done some good work. Of course, they get attacked time and time again by those who don't want their power base to be eroded. And some of those attacks come from all across the political spectrum. And so it's not just Republicans attacking or Democrats attacking it. There's commentary that gets pretty brassy on occasion, but they have remained in existence. They've been supported, well supported with financial contributions. And so they're continuing to function. And they have auxiliary plans, conditional plans in place that if we get to a point in the electoral process in 2024 where there are candidates who simply don't merit the trust of their judgment, and they'll have a steering committee engaged that's bipartisan to make those kinds of decisions. There's at least a mechanism there. So yes, there's some serious thinking, Tom. I think that really is the essence of your question is there serious thinking going on? And I can tell you it's grown exponentially since the taxpayer speech in terms of what I'm aware of. And people are working on these things all across the country. So I expect it's going to continue to evolve.
Okay, very good. Jean Dolman, and then we go to Linda Nelson and Carol Mick. Jean, you're muted, Jean. There.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Governor Racicot, for your many contributions to our state and to our nation, and also for coming this morning. It's a rare treat to hear you speak. But I think you already talked about one issue that I think we need to resolve. You mentioned the lack of trust. That is what I talk to my fellow citizens, and they're turned off by politics because they don't trust anybody. They especially don't trust politicians, and we'll have to work on that. But another thing, I've been thinking a lot and reading a lot, and I think that the question of racism has raised its ugly head, and a lot of it's there are racists, there are assimilationists, and there are anti-racists, and we're trying to get to be the latter, that is anti-racist. But we haven't resolved that question, and we're still fighting the Civil War. We haven't finished that. And to get where we need to be, we have to deal with that as well. And I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Well, I couldn't agree more. You know, when I mentioned earlier that there were imperfections in the ultimate disposition of our constitutional effort back in 1787, that was one of them. There was a failure to completely and totally abrogate that as an issue from the landscape of America. There was an accommodation because there were other pressing issues as well, and probably a familiarity and a level of comfort that was inappropriate with that particular issue and seen probably not in the same light as these more commanding and competitive, compelling issues that they were confronting. So we failed in the beginning, Gene, but we did put a process into our constitutional document that allows us to change it. And there have been some significant changes, but we have many miles to go before we sleep, largely with the hearts of America and with the soul of the country. The problem that I see presently is that we can't even talk to each other about some of these issues. We will not discipline ourselves to the point to where we step into a convention hall and discuss these topics in thoughtful, meaningful ways and come to some resolutions, because everybody's so angry, and this anger gets fueled by these hucksters on the internet. Yeah. And aggravated. And in a sense, you know, when people are fearful, they tend to gravitate toward those things they feel some sense of comfort about. And so gravitating toward these cruel racial comments or positions because they don't know exactly where to go, and it's a leap into the future that they're not used to or didn't experience or have no idea about. And so they join forces with others who are saying careless things, dealing with careless policies, being insensitive to those around them. And so, yeah, that's a part of what I'm saying is bringing decency to our communications, everything that we do, communications, policy, procedures, being truthful. So this is an issue that involves both people of color and those not of color, trying to be responsible, because we both have things to be done here. but how we don't even get to talk about it because there's nothing but anger that's being that's the currency, and it's being shot back and forth across boundary lines. But you are absolutely correct about that issue. I just wish we could get to the substance of it someday. And I mean, you take a look at things like athletic competitions, and you can't tell me that 100,000 people in any stadium in America on an NFL Sunday has concerns with race. If there's a more racially integrated venue with more people of color and non-color than any other place on the planet congregated on a Sunday afternoon, it's there. And that shows you the least amount of racism of all. And if you look to the players, they're supportive of each other because they must be. In order to be a team, you have to be. They've transgressed those boundaries that sometimes hold the rest of us back. So it's a hugely important issue. Mm-hmm. But we have to take the time to deal with each other, build trust, be self-disciplined, recognize the injustice of it, and do those kinds of things that can actually change minds and hearts. But it's going to be a while, I would guess, till we even start talking about it. But if we don't, it's going to continue to fester.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's go to Senator Nelson.
Thank you. I'm wondering how low we're going to get before we can start turning things around. And one of the things that concerns me a lot is the amount of money it takes to run for office. It's gotten to be absolutely huge, and most people simply can't afford to do it out of their own pockets. And we get hit from every angle to donate to this and donate to that. But a lot of good people simply can't run. Is there a way we can get our arms around the amount of money it takes? Can we somehow get this limited? What are your thoughts on that, Governor?
My thoughts are, I think it's pretty clear that we have to do it with a constitutional amendment because, the Citizens United case pretty much said political committees and those that make expenditures have a right to free speech, and it can't be curtailed or diminished. But if that's the case, then we should get on with it. I mean, the notion, and you're absolutely right about the fact that those funding decisions are made by people inside parties. And they're made on the basis of determining which candidates they feel some allegiance to. They are made on the basis of whether or not a person they think can win. They're made on the basis of the level of office that's being sought and the amount of acclamation that might be awarded to those who support some campaigns and not others. So there's all kinds of insidious impacts from our campaign finance system. But you've touched upon an issue that I think is absolutely essential and compelling and urgent. Dorothy and I have talked about this as well on a number of occasions. The person that I could not properly describe the amount of admiration and respect that I have for her. And this is after we went through, a brutal campaign in the sense that it required everything each of us had. There was never a moment where there was something unseemly done. We both had about the same amount of financing arranged for the campaign. And I think we both spent just a little bit in excess of $1 million, which to us was overpowering. It seemed like an incredible amount of money. Well, this last time, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, $15 million was spent on the governor's race. And as I mentioned, 360 million, 150 million on the Senate race alone, and 15 billion across the country. And that has just gone up exponentially every new election cycle. So, but we have to demand it. And if you took a close look at what happened with the weapons issue recently with the devastation in Uvalde, finally, there was some action taken because I think that enough Republicans joined with Democrats to realize that the public was fed up and they had it with this nonsense. And as a consequence, they made a down payment, didn't go near far enough in my judgment, but made a down payment on doing something reasonable, more than had been done in a quarter century. So they will hear us eventually. But it takes a loud voice, and it takes us all being on the same page with some transcendent issues that are not partisan. And campaign finance is one of them. Race is another. So we have our work cut out for us, but you can't give up. You know, it's just impossible for the people of our generation to say, well, I don't think I can influence things. Well, I think we can.
Yes.
And I think this meeting this morning is an indication. You send hope, a tiny ripple of hope, as Robert Kennedy said, forward by dropping a pebble in the water. If we all do that, you create a mighty wave of capacity to overwhelm. And so I don't think we ought to give up on it. I think we ought to demand it. I'm going to be meeting with and talking with representatives from our congressional delegation. I don't know how it is they get so usurped. I suspect Tom could probably address this issue as well as I can, and Jim Elliott. When you're a part of a group, there is a level of comfort, and especially when your group is being either minimized or attacked for certain policy questions, you tend to gather together, and there is a certain amount of herd mentality. And I think in Congress, what happens is, it seems to me like everybody, whether Democrat or Republican, ultimately becomes a full bona fide member of the flock. And exhibiting some kind of courage, it's very difficult. More difficult probably at the federal level and the state level. But somehow we have to draw out these leaders. There's a lot of good people there. It's just, it doesn't seem that they are capable of or willing to stand up.
Okay, we got Carol Ming and Lee Nixon too. So let's go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, I've been hearing in the talk a lot of buzzwords. My main concern is that we have failed as a country to maintain a certain educational level. So when students get out of school, they know what they're walking into as far as socially and their social commitment to a government to keep it that way. I'm really amazed at how, say probably 20 to 40-year-olds just do not have a grasp of what it means to be a citizen in a country. I think our kids are getting it now, and we need to keep fueling that so that we can build a basis of understanding of what we're doing, so we can maintain civility. Without it, we just don't know what's going on. I figured most of the last 15, 20 years has been a lot of social, political, and justice couch potatoes. In other words, they just, hey, I like that guy, he'll do it, you know, forget about who he is, what he did, you know, the whole thing. The other thing is what we need to do when we finally get a firm foundation, or at least a good footing, is tenacity. Tenacity will run out. I often use the phrase in the Bible. There's some good phrases and discussions of situations where people were in the Bible, whether you agree with the Bible or whether you're a Christian or whatever. It's a good book just to know what goes on. And one of the things is the widow who had a thing against this judge, and she just hounded him until he couldn't stand it any longer, and he relented, you know. And that's kind of the attitude we just have to do. Just have to, you know, be like a snapping turtle and bite it and hold on. And I'm hoping that we can get back to talking with each other, because there's no way to resolve any issue if you don't have several opinions. Because one sees it one direction, you know, it's like the adage of the elephant and blind man, you know. They all get something different, but if they come together, they could figure it out that what they were feeling was an elephant, you know.
Okay.
Well, Gene, Carol, I think you're absolutely correct, and I should have mentioned this earlier. As a matter of fact, parenthetically, the Bible was the most referenced work that was sought for direction at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. So it was a critical part of their deliberations and discussions during the entire convention for 117 days. But education is absolutely essential, and you are right that the fact is we're not teaching civics anymore or American history as a mandatory requirement. And I had an opportunity to check with one of the 41-year professor at MSU about who teaches American government and political science, and he did a small analysis that revealed that only 15% of the students at MSU had taken an American government or a civics class. And it's not a part of core curriculums in many, many institutions across the country. It was a given that it was at one point in time. And in addition to all of the imperatives that you mentioned for doing that, for having a more robust civics educational requirement, is the notion that liberal arts generally have had to give way to STEM programs, and clearly you can understand the imperatives of science and math. They have everything to do with our successful existence on the planet, but at the same time, liberal arts education teaches us how to think, not what to think. And frankly, we have gotten away from being firmly committed to a liberal arts education within our institutions of higher learning. One thing that we have done, that I've done here, is in concert with the Mansfield Center, we have applied for a grant from the Washington Foundation, and we have been informed that it has been approved for us to design a video series with the model being a Ken Burns film on how we came to believe in the process of creating a constitution. In other words, just one of those examples I gave to you before, how long it took us, 180 years, how we struggled, how we fought to get to the point from 1607 to 1787 to put together a governing document that we could agree upon. And it was a hard-won battle. And the alternatives to our life now are really, they boil down to a return to the jungle. I mean, we've tried everything else as a human race. None of it worked. So if we want to return to something or move to something, the only alternative is to a system where the strong survive and the weak don't. And I don't think that's acceptable to anybody. And you can still see the vestigial remnants of the design of our government from the beginning, with the appropriate amount of human engagement, person to person. For instance, in our courts, the judiciary is actually the last remaining remnant of our government operating the way it was designed to operate. And that's because there are some simple rules that have to be followed. First of all, the burden of proof is on the person trying to get something done. Secondly, you can't use gossip or hearsay. Thirdly, you have to have competent evidence presented to a panel of impartial people. They have to sit together in the same room. They're given instructions by the judge. So all these rules that were a part of our normal deliberations prior to the internet and have now been abandoned influence profoundly how we set about to make decisions, which is exactly, I think, what you are describing. So there are educational. I'm sorry?
Mark, I just want to add something to the law of the jungle. If you watch National Geographic and the Gorillas of the Mist and all that stuff, you'll find out the law of the jungle is probably more humane than what we're doing right now.
Well, it's because it doesn't involve evil intent.
Yeah.
It involves instinct. But the things that are coming out these days they're just designed. They would be almost genius if they weren't so destructive. They're designed to hurt and to diminish.
Okay, let's go ahead to Ming Cabrera, former chairman of the Yellowstone County Democratic Party.
Thanks, Governor Maracicot. I know you've heard about the new party out there called the Forward Party. And there's
Yes,
is not left, not right. Let's go moderate. Andrew Yang just got yanked last week by CNN and by Fox News in regards to his idea of a moderate country. And what's hurting us more, and we looked at what happened in Wyoming yesterday. My goodness. I mean, we're looking at people that are either far right or far left. And whenever they look at the Democratic Party, they look at the Democratic Party as a left-handed country, left-handed party, and the Republicans. But they don't like you, want to look at the moderates, like Bob Brown, Dave Darby. These people have been fighting for the fact that we've got to come up with something that's independent, that we can look at campaign finance reform. You know, a lot of people would like to run. I guarantee you that. And a lot of people, young people, don't want to run because we're put in boxes, or they're put in boxes to where we're going. So I guess my question is, can a third party, you've talked about it, can the forward party make a run for it as far as that goes in the future?
well, I do think that it is entirely possible. It's going to take a lot of people. This 65%, this great middle of America, is going to have to come together to coalesce in some fashion. I think the coalescing process is best built around some individual proposals that allow for us to congeal, if you will, into a unified group of people in the middle, recognizing we're not going to be pursuing radical agendas. The radical agenda we have is loyalty to this country, and for the creation of a political system that makes sense and focuses upon the power of ideas, good ideas that can carry their own weight. But yeah, I don't know if we'll live to see it, Ming. I hope to God we do, because I think the problems are so incredibly urgent that we are on the brink. We're on the precipice of falling apart. And if we don't do something about this, if we don't come together, I know that the experience you've had with kids, we've had the same with ours. You know, our oldest is 50, our youngest is 41. And we have 9 grandchildren, some of whom are now engaged and they've graduated from college, and they take a look at politics. They're very well informed. They all vote. I have no idea how they vote. I didn't think that was necessarily my prerogative. I can remember when I came to my father and said I was going to run on the Republican ticket, he said, "What in the name of God?" Actually, he called on the Lord in pretty graphic terms and said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, well, I'd read the platform. That's what I was taught. Take a look at the scientific evidence that's available to you, and then make the best judgment you can. But even he, the child of the Depression, on his deathbed, when I was running for office, after having lost 3 times, and having told him I was going to run as a Republican, and he couldn't understand why, he looked at me as he was dying, honestly, and said he'd voted for Ronald Reagan. And so if my dad can come a ways to try and do what he thought was right for the country at the moment, I think a lot of us could come a ways. I mean, here we are this morning, and it doesn't seem to be painful to me. It seems to be enlightening and encouraging and inspiring. And so I think it's possible, Ming, and I think that it is taking place. I see it moving with more speed, but we've all got to push it, and we have to be vocal.
Okay, next, Lee Nixon had his hand up.
Okay. A judicial system. We know that Georgia has lawsuits against Trump. We know that the AG in New York has lawsuits against Trump. Probably our national AG will get into it. Is the judicial system fast enough to get it before the next election, where if he's president, they can't get at him?
Yes, it is. I think the fact collection process has been grueling and grudging on some occasions. But I have no doubt that they're going to move with some speed and some dispatch to conclude their investigative processes. I think they're jointly being conducted presently with both Justice and the January 6th committee. A lot of heavy lifting has already been done by the committee.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that is relevant evidence that is preserved and can be relied upon, and there's going to be more, would be my guess. So, and I think there's going to be a demand for there to be a conclusion. The final judgment is being made about charging documents and venues of different cases. So I will be horribly disappointed and saddened if it is not concluded, if there aren't at least charging decisions within the next year.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Tom, Jim Elliott.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to, can we go to Jack
Ab-
Hornbeck?
Absolutely. I don't know how to raise my hand. I don't mean to interrupt, but go ahead.
And we'll get to you next then. Jack?
Yes, thank you. One of my large concerns for establishing trust and fairness in our future is voter suppression, and how so many states have done so many things to keep certain people from voting. What is your thought on that?
Well, you know, this is another one of those arguments that's absolutely critical to our existence and loaded with explosives. And we have to be very careful, to be honest with you, about how we characterize what it is that exists in terms of voting systems around the country. I mean, there is some rightful and appropriate critique of voting laws in a number of different states. At the same time, there is a large amount of exaggeration about what is actually taking place. You know, I sat in counting rooms in Florida for 8 weeks and watched the people back in 1992 working in good faith to try and bring the presidential election to a conclusion. And I mean, I sat days looking at ballots. They were the old Votomatic ballots that were the punch cards that you probably all remember. And of course, the punch cards were a marvelous invention, it was thought at the time, improving upon paper ballots. So we have come full circle now. We've gone from punch cards, we've gone to automatic electronic voting machines, and now there are people who want to go back to paper ballots. So it is a very sticky issue and sometimes be very difficult. But let me tell you about Georgia. My normal method is, I guess, having been a prosecutor for so long, I want to know what the facts are before I make a decision about something, which should be, I think, you know, a pretty good way of doing things. So I went back and read every provision of Georgia's new law. And what I discovered was this, that first of all, it was much more liberal than Delaware's law. It had many more opportunities for registration. It had depositories that were spread around the state for ballots to be submitted into collection points. It had late voting, mail-in voting, which was much more liberal than Delaware, which happens to be the home of the president. So you cannot get to a point to where you don't really carefully analyze these things, because I'm certain they could have done better with parts of their new election code. But to find a common theme that they were trying to create a circumstance that reflected Jim Crow laws of the past was not a fair criticism. And so before you elevate, you need to make sure you really analyze what it is that people are talking about. And you know, those counting offices, it's really hard when you have to produce a result. There's so much pressure upon you to produce a result, and you have same-day voting, and you have depositories spread throughout the city that have to be collected, checked, and ultimately counted. I think in many ways, our laws in Montana were liberalized. You know, our students can use a student ID. They can use a power bill if they have any other picture ID of any kind. So be careful before I would advise, because I approached this thinking, well, these are outrageous things that are happening. So I decided to actually read the laws, and they can always stand improvement, but I could not find a concerted effort to try and limit the voting of individual populations and people across the state of Montana. Would I have done things differently? Yes. Would I wanted to go overboard to make certain that everyone universally could see it as totally fair and complete? Yes. But was it to a point to where it was seeking exclusion of some of our fellow citizens? I couldn't establish that. So it is a relevant question. Actually, the most relevant question and urgent question is what we do from the time the ballots are cast. With the federal electoral process and the casting of electoral ballots, that's what needs to be fixed more than anything, most urgently.
Okay, let's see. Oh, yes, Jim Elliott from way over on the other side of Thompson Falls, Trout Creek. Former legislator for many years and expert on taxes. Jim Elliott.
My apologies for violating the civility of the meeting. I just don't know how to use this technology, and happy to not. Governor, I'm much less sanguine about the viability of a third party than you are. I've tried to move the Democratic Party a little bit and have not had much success in that. And with the Democrats, the difficulty is the understanding of the rural areas by the urban legislators. I think that a third party moves the other parties, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, in a certain direction, but I also think that the third party can cause, I'm usually much more articulate than this when I'm talking to cows, believe me. I think in the 2000 election in which you participated in Florida, the third party denied the Democrats the presidency. Okay, that happened. A third party could possibly enable the Republican Party, such as it is today, to take over the country. And I was talking to a fellow who was telling me about your efforts and Bob Brown, Senator Bob Brown's effort, Secretary of State Bob Brown, not to be confused with my state senator here, to change the Republican Party from within. I don't know that parties can be really changed from within without a threat from without. And I said to this fellow, friend Marceau by name, in order to change the Republican Party, you're going to have to destroy it first and rebuild it, because I don't know that it can come back from within. What do you think?
Well, typically, your comments don't fall on barren ground with me, and they're keenly insightful, and I think there are those dangers, Jim, that you mentioned, but the alternative is nothing at all. And so as a consequence, I think it's one of the arrows in the quiver. I think it's the most difficult thing to accomplish in a way that is orderly and not destructive. I don't think it's impossible, but it'll depend upon a wide swath of America being supportive, and probably a lot of disappointment and angst born out of the circumstances that we're presently living through. You and I are basically the same age. And, you know, I think probably both of us would say when we were growing up, we could kind of depend on the country processing its business. And even though there were disagreements, I don't think we ever thought of the day that the United States of America would not exist in some fashion or another, as it had throughout the course of our lives. In fact, that's a dynamic that's just impacted me in the last 10 years, maybe 5 years, where I've thought it is a real possibility. The amount of fear I sense, and I don't know if this is the same for you, and angst and anxiety among my fellow Montanans of virtually any age, not below 18, maybe even not below 22, is one of angst and concern and wonderment about what can be done. So I think we just have to keep trying. You dedicated a lot of years of your life to public service. And if you try to quantify that in terms of recompense and dollars and cents, you wouldn't even come close to breaking even, because you gave way more than you ever got. But I don't know how to give up, Jim. And I think we have to keep working at it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I agree with you. And I think there may be some dark days ahead before there's some bright days. Thank you very much, Governor. I appreciate it.
I'm gonna jump over Carol, you've had one question already, and go to Mary Westwood. If we have a chance, we get back to Carol. Mary?
Yes. I appreciate what you're saying, Governor, and I appreciate that you may have finally seen the light as I see it. You know, because I actually should probably thank you, because you're one of the people who made me a Democrat. And I was raised by good Republican parents. And I continue to live their values. But I do not, and since the 1980s, have not found those values present in many of the Republicans that I have met. And as you know, I lobbied for quite a few years. And so I met them up close and personal, and never thought that I would ever reach a point where I could not even respect them as humans. And that was very troubling to me, to reach that point with some of the Republicans I met. Because I actually was Goldwater girl in the, you know, when as a teenager. And so I wondered what the thoughts are within the Republican Party about how their machinations have turned out. I mean, to go from someone like Eisenhower to someone like Donald Trump is just incredible to me, that a party would change its major philosophy from basically public service to greed. And it's just very troubling to me. And how are the Republicans within the party who may recognize the problems they have, how are they dealing with it? Because all I see in the politicians that like Mitch McConnell and those kind of guys is, you know, they just play along with the game. And you can't play along with the game that's a loser. I mean, it's a loss for everybody. So what is going on in their heads that they think it's okay to keep moving in this direction?
I wish I could understand or knew the answer to that question, Mary. I'm mystified as well about what it is that motivates and moves. I think, you know, when I entered into the service of the people of Montana in 1992, I was elected with 4 Democrats, and I spent 8 years working with them on the land board, on the board of examiners, on a variety of different issues over time. I dealt with their budgets. We were incredibly close, and I think we remain close. I just had dinner the other night, as a matter of fact, Teresa and I did, with Nancy Keenan, and I think that there was a different approach than what that what is presently there today. I think a lot of the edginess is the result of learning a different means of communication with the internet and its edginess and lack of feeling and compassion. But at the same time, you know, I've always, as I stand back and look, there are things that probably I believed in with great sincere commitment that over time, as I have grown older and gained more experience, I wish I would have done differently. And frankly, I think that's a part of it as well. I think our kids are somewhat disenchanted with what it is that politics has to offer, and they see opportunities to do good things in other places at other times. And not one of our children wants to be a candidate, which, you know, after having been a candidate 6 times and losing 3 and being successful with 3, I was a pretty bloodied example for all of them, and they participated in all those debates. But you know, I don't know that I could argue with a lot of what you have described, Mary. I think typically when you take a look at Republicans, an extreme Republican is much more dangerous than an extreme left-leaning person in the political spectrum, and that's something I've concluded. I don't know if it's a matter of wisdom or just a matter of flashing thought, but it seems to me that they can be angrier, a little bit meaner, more organized, and have some money. The flip side is that there are maybe looser ideas in the minds of some on the other side of the political spectrum that don't get carried forward with the same degree of force. I think success has not left the modern Republican Party in a good place. I think that those who hold office sometimes tend to think this is the way it always was, and it's the way they have to be. I think some of them are dedicated to a higher level of, in some ways, I think there's people, it's almost a religion. And as a consequence, they get zealous for their means and methods just as much as they do the substance of the issues that they want to confront. But I don't know that I have a complete explanation for it.
Okay, well, we really have run out of our time. I don't like to hold our speaker longer than we promised that he would get free from this. Carol, if you've got something you can say real quickly, let's see if we can hear what you have to say.
Well, one thing is to, when I remember Trump even getting in on the ticket originally, I kept hearing about he didn't show us income taxes, he wasn't doing something. And I remember in civics class how you have to become a president. And there was just a nice little checklist. And I don't think he did half of it. So he shouldn't have even been on the roster. Okay. The other thing is I take a personal dislike of the Republican Tea Party, because when I was seeing that a lot of couch potatoes were being stupid, I just say, we need to go back to how our country started, when we got people that really realized there were problems and they needed to change what was going and become like the Tea Party, Boston Tea Party, and get off our duffs and do something, maybe not violently, but just get activated into our system. And within about 2 months,
Come on, Carol.
within about 2 months, I get all this stuff about the Republican Tea Party. It's like they hacked my email.
Okay.
So,
any final comments then, Mark?
No, but thank you for the privilege. You've been very kind to allow me to be a part of your conversation. I appreciate it very much.
Well, I really appreciate your being here. I think there are some really big issues. I think that, as Jim Elliott points out, it's not easy. Ross Perot did nothing but diminish the Republican Party when he tried to form a third party. So it doesn't work very easily, but it could work. And if we work together, I think you've given us some inspiration to do that. I really appreciate it. And by the way, I want to point out that you're scheduled to be back in Billings on the 14th of September for a meeting at the library with Dorothy Bradley and former Governor Steve Bullock and others. And I think, and also you've accepted my invitation to speak to the Rotary on September 26th. So we appreciate your getting around. You're being in Billings well. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the invites. Thank you all so very much. And thanks for thinking about this, Tom. I'm grateful.
Okay, thank you. And we'll see you all next week.